So the Chinese are in
So
big trouble.
if we link that to the Iran war, so based on what you're saying, China cannot afford to give the Strait of Hormuz, control of the Strait of Hormuz, to the US. So therefore, China needs Iran to be able to beat the US, to be able to deplete their munitions, exhaust them politically, financially, exhaust the world economy. So then,
Or from the other perspective, China has to let the United States win without interfering too much to be able to go back to normal. Because the same rules apply to China as it does the rest of the world. If we're talking about a global energy shock and the Chinese economy is already in bad shape to begin with, there may be more of an economic and financial downside in China than there is, say, in the United States. So maybe China has an interest in staying on the sidelines rather than propping up Iran and basically kind of surrendering the Strait of Hormuz to Trump, assuming that Trump can get it away from the Iranians. That may be the strategy that the administration is using here, using the leverage of the weak Chinese economy and its inability to withstand a tremendous energy shock.
One could say the meeting between the first peace negotiations for Iran, phase one will be Trump and Xi meeting next week. That will be the first phase of the Iran negotiations.
That's the thing. Don't you think that's why Trump delayed the meeting? To me, that's one of the reasons why they delayed the meeting in the first place, because he wanted to go to Beijing from a period of strength, or from a position of strength, and say, look, I've got you guys over a barrel here. I've got you by the balls, is what I really have here. So we're going to negotiate. I mean, that's what Trump is. Trump is a negotiator. He's a deal maker. He understands negotiating from a position of strength. Whatever you think about the guy, that's how he operates. So I think that's the strategy from the U.S. as it relates to China, to leverage the energy crisis, as bad as it is in the United States and especially Europe and the rest of the world, Africa. We talk about food shortage probabilities. So there's lots of negative consequences, but the upside is to negotiate the Chinese, whatever it is that's on his mind and on his agenda, from a position of strength.
What do you think of China's oil reserves? Everyone said they're well prepared for a shortage like this, at least domestically. Them in Japan, but even more. Is that true?
Yeah, they are prepared to an extent, but there's a shelf life to all of it. Eventually, just the level of the amount of oil that has been constrained and bottled up in Hormuz and the Gulf of Arabia is absolutely astronomical. So it won't matter how much strategic reserves you have. There are already signs of fuel shortages around Asia. In fact, the Chinese were one of the first countries to limit the export of distilled products because of that, because they were concerned about having running out of feedstock. Now they have rescinded the export controls to an extent, but again, there will be nobody who was spared from an energy shock. I mean, going back to what the question you asked earlier. If this thing goes on for a couple more months, let alone the end of the year, for a couple more months, there will be nobody who is spared from this. It's really then a question of who gets hit the hardest and what happens as a result of that.
Do you think BRICS will come out stronger or weaker? Obviously, it depends on what happens in the war in Iran. But if the war ends now, if they reach a deal now, BRICS will come out stronger or weaker? Because I think stronger if Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, no?
If Iran can continue to control, if Iran can hang on here, and the U.S. just kind of backs off, then I don't know if necessarily BRICS is stronger, but at least the U.S. ends up taking a step back. I mean, the BRICS, to me, there's not a whole lot of cohesion and there's not a whole lot of strength in BRICS to begin with. I think BRICS is more symbolic than not. I think it's more of a loose political affiliation to try to give voice to the so-called global South, which is essentially missing from every other multinational organization, whether it be the G20, the G7, certainly the United Nations, which is structured in the old world. So I think BRICS is a sort of a loose affiliation and not really some kind of actual legitimate, dependable alliance. It's certainly never going to be a currency block or a currency issuer, what people talk about.
There's a whole debate about SWIFT versus SIFT, I think, like the SWIFT system versus the Chinese, Russian, Iranian system. I know that the other system is very small, like below 10%, but it's well below 10%. I think it's below 5%.
It's negligible.
Yeah, but it's growing. It's growing relatively quickly, no?
But when you start from zero, the growth rate's going to be huge, and you don't really get that far. Yeah, so I mean, look, the The reason why the dollar remains, it's not even the dollar, it's the euro dollar. The reason why the euro dollar remains the reserve currency is because it does the roles of a reserve currency, which nobody ever talks about. Reserve currency has specific functions, and because of those specific functions, it requires a tremendous amount of effort and resources to achieve them. The analogy I always use is if you want to replace the euro dollar as reserve currency, it would be like replacing the internet from scratch. Meaning you got to come up with hardware, you've got to bury all the fiber optic cables, you got to have new software systems. It is an enormous task. It's not just a couple of countries getting together from top level bureaucrats and saying we're going to create a new currency. That doesn't work. A currency needs to be useful and available. And to make a currency useful and available requires a massive amount of infrastructure and resources, which the eurodollar built ad hoc over many, many decades. So in order to change the reserve currency is an absolutely enormous task. Now, yes, there will be bilateral arrangements. There's always been bilateral arrangements that work around the main existing reserve currency structure, but that is not a competition or a replacement for the entire reserve currency. So as sad as it is, because I'm a proponent that we need to replace the current reserve currency system. It hasn't worked since 2007, at least not in the way that we needed to. But right now, there is absolutely nothing on the horizon that is even close to taking on the roles of a reserve currency, let alone something like the BRICS.
Yeah, for people, we did a show, me and you, a few months ago, talking about the euro dollar and what it means. You've explained it pretty well on that show. Essentially, it's dollar denominated deposits outside the US, which is what really allows the US to be a reserve currency. You know, most people talk about, you know, the American military enforcing the US, the importance of oil for the US, but you know, those are important, but the euro dollar is the main reason. That's being so entrenched in our system that getting off it is almost impossible.
It's really the network effect, right? You're stuck with it because it works. At least it works well enough that it keeps the lights on.
And it's decent, and capitalism as well. Like, you know, people can't. There's no alternative. Europe is really struggling right now. Japan is struggling, especially now, and of course, China is not a capitalist economy, so people can't really trust it when the Chinese government really controls the currency.
That's a huge part of it too that people really don't think about. I mean, nobody thinks about reserve currency mechanics to begin with, but it's rule of law. How do you settle disputes? It's respect for contracts. We use the old English system. We developed out of the English system, which respects contracts and private parties and rights to an extent that allows the eurodollar to be trustworthy. You know, it's not perfect by any means. Whereas even assuming that the Chinese could create a workable system, they would be using the Chinese legal system, which nobody wants to get involved with. If you're in a financial arrangement with a state-owned enterprise in China, you're going to lose. It doesn't matter whether you're right or whether you have a contract. The Chinese judicial system is set up to preference the government and the state to begin with. So it's one reason why all these bankrupt developers want their bankruptcy proceedings in Hong Kong rather than on the mainland. Because if you're in Hong Kong, at least you have a chance. Whereas if you're on the mainland, you're going to get screwed, especially if you're an external party to it. So that is a huge part of it. The mechanisms for arbitration, respect for contracts and privacy, it's an underappreciated aspect of reserve currency mechanics.
Yeah, the system itself is the moat. The system is the moat. Jeffrey, really appreciate having you on the show. I'm sure I'm going to have you again for explaining all this and continuing to peel that onion. I appreciate it.